Well, today I'm going to be sharing with you part two of the Doctrine of the First with Chris McGill. If you have not seen part one of this two-part series, do yourself a favor, stop this video and check that one out first. If not, it's okay. I can leave you a link to it at the end of this video. You can check it out at the end of this one. Either way is fine. But can I tell you, make sure you check out both. And also make sure to stick around after the interview here, because I'm going to be sharing like a recap commentary on the subject of the Doctrine of the First, as I have had a few weeks now to really reflect and commentate on this idea, this concept. With all that said, you ready? Then let's do it. Hey friends, allow me to share with you this book, True Rookie Cards, a systematic approach that filters through the fluff so you'll know which rookie cards to buy. This book is exactly 1 year as of the recording of this video. It is 1 year ago. It was released on Amazon, and it has been an absolute success. I'm hoping that if you are interested in this book, you would check it out. Links are in the description down below. But more importantly, if you have read it or you plan on purchasing it and reading it, please leave a review. It would be much appreciated. No, without further delay, let's get to the interview with Chris McGill. Here we go.
So here's the idea behind the Doctrine of the First. My exploration into the idea of the first started with a desire to figure out is the love of the first, because the hobby clearly has it. So like let me give an example to make that concrete. And this is an ultra modern example, so I beg the indulgence of the vintage and pre-war collectors and 90s collectors. 2012 Prism is a product that has produced cards that are held in a very high esteem among football and basketball collectors in particular. But it also holds true even for baseball. And I think hockey has a first Prism, where there was a brief period of time where Prism was NHL licensed too. And but I can speak with expertise to the basketball and the football side of it. And if one were to ask a basketball or a football collector, or somebody who's pretty knowledgeable about the market, why is it that, for example, let's take the example of LeBron James's 2012 Prism Gold. Why is that card worth 10 times more than all of his other Prism Golds? Even his 2013 Prism Gold. Why is his 2012 just worth so much more? Or Tom Brady. Why is Tom Brady's 2012 Prism Gold worth so much more? And the answer that most will give is that it's because it's the first issue of Prism. And right. So there's a significance, there's layers of significance. There's the significance of it being the first year of this particular product and its base set. There's the significance of it being Tom Brady or LeBron James's first appearance in this particular product or set. There's sort of layers of firsts that start building here. And so I became interested, and my interest in this started a few years ago, and I've been thinking about it for a while. My interest was, is this a relic of is this an accident? Is this just that initially somebody paid a bunch of money for a LeBron 2012 Prism Gold and it printed a comp, and then from there everybody just sort of followed suit. Everybody said, well, that's the comp, and so I'm just going to pay more for this one. And so, in other words, is it just sort of a relic, an artifact of history that it just sort of happened that way? Or is there substance to this? Is this not so arbitrary, but instead is there really something more that we can are there more tools that we can use to understand this than just, well, it sells for more? And so in particular, is that justification that it's the first, is that actually communicating something that's not arbitrary? Is it communicating something that's that goes beyond consensus and actually that tries to approach something objective. And where my investigation led was to philosophy. And I think it's actually amazing how the hobby, the deeper we get into it, the more we can learn about it by bringing philosophical lenses. You mentioned the lens of theology.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of overlap and analysis that can be done.
There is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I tried to bring, in this particular case, especially because I was trying to approximate objectivity, I wanted to bring the lens of mathematical reasoning, or the lens of deductive reasoning, I wanted to operate in the branch of philosophy known as logic.
I love it.
In particular, because theology has a lot of overlaps with this, especially okay. So I started thinking, especially because the idea of a first is a mathematical concept. It's a numerical concept. And so I started thinking, is there something within the branch of logic that distinguishes a first from a second, or a first from a third? And there are at least two different ways to approach this. If I adopt the approach of chronology, which is the sequence of things, there really is nothing particularly special about a first that's not arbitrary. So in other words, if there was just 2012 Prism made and no other edition of Prism was ever made, then it would still be accurate to call it the first, but it would also be accurate to call it the last. So there's something about chronology that it doesn't really shed any light. It's just, if something is the first and then something is the second, there's nothing extra that the chronological approach teaches us. But if I take an ontological approach, which is if I try to investigate the essence of what something is by understanding how it relates to something else, if I take that approach, suddenly the first starts to have a special meaning. And so the way the ontological approach works is that a first is something that can only exist if a second exists, because it's the relationship between the two that establishes them. But the second needs the first in order for the second to arise. The first, we can always default back to the chronological view, and we can always say that something is the first even if there isn't a second, or even if there isn't a third. We can always say that something is a first, it's also a last, but we can always say that it has that property of firstness even if a second doesn't exist. But a second can only exist if a first does. And because the second is ontologically dependent on the first, and the first is ontologically dependent on the second, but the first is chronologically independent. And so if we bring these two views together, what starts to emerge is the idea that every number in a sequence, every type of something that follows after the initial type, has a dependence on that initial type that the initial type doesn't quite have on the later types. So the second, it has this dependent on the first, and ontologically the first depends on the second, but chronologically it doesn't. And so we have this first appearance of something that, from a logical philosophical point of view, it has properties that the later editions of it just can't have. It doesn't quite depend on the later editions the way that the later editions depend on the first. And that's very abstract, but there we can make we can make a real world example out of it that's very obvious. The Son can't exist without the Father. The thing that comes prior is a necessary precondition to the thing that comes after. And now the idea of the first starts to escape being just a slogan, and it starts to mean something in the domain of logical reasoning. It starts to have properties, when we investigate it from different philosophical points of view, that later editions just can't have. And so then I think to myself, well, why does that matter? Now let's go into the realm of collecting cards. Why does it matter that a first edition of a card is something that is chronologically independent of the later versions. Why does that matter? And I think the reason why it matters is because it creates a rarity that the other editions just can't have. So when the qualities start amassing to the first appearance of something, and we realize that that first appearance can't be replicated, that you can have a second and you can have a third and you can have other iterations of it, but you can only have the one first, and the specialness of that one first being that it stands apart from the others, and that you can have only a first. You can't have a second without a first. You can't have a third without a second and a first. You can't have a fourth without a third and a second and a first. And as you start investigating that, you start to see that the first has the ability to give rise to other things that the other things don't quite have. That's something that separates the first from all the things that follow.
Beautiful.
And so if that creates a rarity, if that creates a property that first thing has that none of the other things can have, I think that's a non-arbitrary property to desire. That this is a non-arbitrary way of separating out one thing from the other.
So let's carry on that. Let's give some examples of cards. Okay, we can look at parallels. All right, there's Prism base along with 60 parallels. Okay, those 60 parallels derived from the first. That's how crucial that is. Another one is if we follow the first to its truest form today, and this is how we got to be logical, we have to be flexible, and we have to think things through all the way, because if we're specifically holding on to the philosophy of the first, then that means Sports Illustrated cards are the true rookie card, right? So there's the danger in that.
I do have a point on that.
Okay. Another one is first Bowman autos would be the main card, which it is for a lot of people, but it's a great. It even has the first Bowman insignia that everybody goes crazy for. That's the power of the first, right? But there are some things there's some other rules that we need to bring into consideration in order to have a clear one, because there can't be multiple ones. There has to be other things included, like rookie year pro debut type of thing. That's really important. And in hindsight, it's one of the best decisions the Players Association made. Chris, I was around back then, and I can tell you that it was absolute chaos until they brought this line of clarity, which in hindsight is a fabulous idea. But go ahead with yours.
Yeah, because you make the precise point that's like the corollary to the first point, which is, how do we know that we're talking about the same type of thing when we're talking about a first? So if we've established the doctrine of the first, and as a quick side note, this doctrine has precedence in all different arenas. So when I was on Brett's show, I made a reference to riparian rights, which are water rights. And during the frontier days and the settling of the Western United States, as they do today, back then they dealt with water shortages. And in the event that there's a water shortage and that water had to be rationed, or access to the water had to be rationed for a period of time, the person who could demonstrate that they had made first use of that particular water was the person whose right took priority over other people's. Just one of many instances, historical instances, that first carried some sort of extra weight. And I don't mean to say that I've settled the first debate either. I just want to open that discussion and because trying to figure out what's arbitrary and what's not, it might all be arbitrary anyway. So I just want to acknowledge that and try to really take a humble approach to that topic, because I certainly sway back and forth on it. But okay, so the idea of the SI for kids thing,
Mm-hmm.
very, very, such an important dimension to this, because it leads to the question of the type of thing. What are we talking about? It goes back to Wittgenstein and language games. What is a sports card? That's a very, very important question. Because it can lead on, if it's unchecked, if we don't decide with specificity what the type of thing is that we're talking about, then we reach the point that Josh and I have reached when discussing this before, which is that sort of is a player's T-ball card. Is that a card that's a sports card? Is that of the same type of thing that we're talking about? Because that would predate the SI for kids. And if a T-ball card is a sports card, then what about like an ID card at the hospital when they were being born? Is that a sports card? And then if that is, well, what about the birth certificate? And then you sort of reach this like absurd conclusion that the birth certificate is a player's ultimate sports card. Then you say, well, if somebody wants to define a sports card so loosely that a birth certificate can become part of that definition, so be it. That's their prerogative. But I am not in the business. I'm not interested in collecting birth certificates. That's a few steps too far. So I want to rein it back in. And so that's where how we define the type of thing that we're trying to identify the first of is extremely important. And so like I've sort of carved out a boundary for myself, and I don't know if there's a totally non-arbitrary way to do this. Not that it matters to me, but the boundary that I've carved out is fully licensed and is and at the highest level of the professional sport. And then within there, I certainly prefer cards that can be counted as playing days. And although I do, it gets really tricky with Michael Jordan talking about playing days cards that become, because he didn't play in 1993-94. He didn't play during the 1998-99 season, but our cards, playing days cards, if the statistics on the back and the caption on the back are documenting what happened in the 1997-98 season, because those are the earliest and the first cards that documents that season. So even though they don't associate with a playing season for Michael Jordan, is there an argument that they're still playing days cards because they are the only card, they're the first cards to document a season that otherwise hasn't been documented? And then for Jordan, could you also make the argument that from the 84-85 through 02-03, that those are all playing days cards, because that's the time period in between his debut and his final retirement? So there's so many, these are fun rabbit holes to go down, but so this is some of this. See, these are some of the things that are, these decisions have to be made too, in terms of what is the type of thing that we're talking about. Because if, just to make it simple, without me derailing myself, if we just say we're by a sports card, what we mean, or maybe to be more precise, by a professional sports card, what we mean is the player in a card that is fully licensed, that is associated with a season that corresponds to their professional debut or thereafter. And then perhaps we even add that it should show them in their professional uniform. But the way that we define the type of thing. So if I come to the table and I say, this is what a sports card is, or this is what a professional sports card is, and when I'm talking about it first, I'm interested in the first professional sports card. That's the category of thing that matters to me. Now we've completed the discussion, because now we've come up with some ideas behind why the first might have significance on a logical level, and we've defined what the type of thing is that we're trying to figure out, that we're identifying firsts of. So you need both. You need both of those components. You need to know you need to specify what you're talking about, as well as identify the doctrine of the first.
Yes. Well said. Beautifully said. And that is, who do you think then, how does one have to make that decision individually, or is there a collective body of collectors that abide by this? How does that translate into?
I love this question because I know I have a sense of how you approach this, and I'm a little bit different, but I'm going to use this opportunity to make a point that goes in your direction.
Okay.
So the community aspect does matter a lot. Consensus matters a lot, and I think it matters in ways that we as individual collectors don't always have a total awareness of. So so for example, like why does community matter? How come I can't just collect in isolation by myself, never talk to anybody, never think about other people? Why can't this just be a totally lone wolf venture? And because if it were truly a lone wolf venture, then not only would you be collecting by yourself, but also that would mean nobody else is collecting at all. That would mean that you are on an island by yourself collecting cards. And so there wouldn't be a market. There wouldn't be prices of things. There wouldn't be social media posts. The true isolated lone wolf collector must inhabit a world where they have all the cards. There's nobody to share them with. There's nobody else collecting to share to put ideas forth. And it quickly becomes apparent that this is antithetical to something in the social nature of the human being. And to make the observation in a slightly different way, if we as humans weren't socialized, if we weren't taught language and habits and ethics by our parents, there are experiments, sociological and psychological experiments that have been done that show sort of the effect and the consequence of what a feral human being looks like. If a human being is sort of raised by wolves type of thing, that they don't have a language, there's so many things the socialization gives us that we just take for granted. And socialization happens in the hobby too. That the role of the community, the role of the other collectors, even when we look at a market price or we look at a price guide or we read an article written in a magazine, or we just see a card for sale, or we look at a display case at a card show, these are all social elements that are directly or indirectly socializing us, that are impacting what we think is important, and that are impacting what we value, and that are impacting what we think is cool versus what we think is not cool. And that doesn't mean we all think the same way. Our brains are going to process that information very differently, as different as we all are, as different as every thumbprint is, everybody's going to bring something slightly different. But the socialization matters. It matters to a human baby. It matters to a human collector. That the social element and how we are socialized, it has a profound impact. And so in that sense, given the importance of community, given the importance of socialization, that that I can't pretend that I'm some lone wolf after existing in this community of collecting. I can't pretend that I'm just some lone wolf and I'm just going to go off and make up the rules on my own, as if somehow I'm separating now from the socialization and the community that's given rise to what I've become. Instead, I have to acknowledge it, even if I try to invent something on my own, that it's the byproduct of so many experiences and socializing moments. And that once I acknowledge that, then instead that pushes me in the direction of consensus, that pushes me in the direction of the community and of continuing the socialization, and that I can make my imprint on that socialization too, the more intentional I get about it. If I think I'm seeing things in a way that maybe other people haven't seen, then I can test that idea out, and I can see how the community accepts it or rejects it. I can see where it falls. But the consensus is a byproduct of socialization. And socialization is very tempting to pretend like it doesn't happen, but it does. It's profound, the way that we get socialized. And so consensus, it's pivotal. It's essential. But I do think that consensus is consensus doesn't mean uniform lockstep agreements on every point. consensus can mean more of an average. So I can feel one way, and this next guy can feel another way, and this next guy can feel another way.
Mm-hmm.
And but sort of the average result ends up being the consensus, to whereas we sort of agree, we get close to agreement, but we don't see everything quite the same way. But if you take the average of the way all of us see it, that's consensus, and then that consensus is sort of a magnet that just is kind of pulling us towards it. But I do think that there is a lane for individual expression, because we all do see things slightly differently. So there's a balance, I guess, is what I'm trying to say here.
Yep.
There's a balance between the individual approach and what the consensus ultimately is.
Man, powerful. Well said. I love that. Where does it end? If we don't have this type of, we end up we end up with the birth certificate being, that's the really, like, where does it end? We have to structure our thoughts.
That's when it's time to come back to the group.
Yeah.
Hold on, man. You got a birth certificate collection? Hold on. Come on back, man. We're going to rein you back in.
But some deep, deep philosophical thoughts there. No perfect answer, Chris, but I think you're on to something big there. And I love the forethought that you bring into it, because it really challenged me into how I think and how I do things. But it's so pivotal, I believe, the consensus. And a lot of people will ask me, well, who said this is the way it is? Kind of like questioning under whose authority, type of thing. And my honest answer is the hobby. When I look at the man who talked to the man who created a lot of this, Dr. James Beckett, and he, a man of a lot of integrity, a man who's very humble, and a man who likes to tell the truth. And he has basically explained that he was simply recording what the hobby consensus was. And once that was established, it's like there was very little argument about what was what, because there was consensus. Everybody just kind of knew, and it wasn't argued or debated or twisted like it is today. And that's, to me, is really the core essence behind the rookie card, is the hobby consensus. And a lot of no, that was for the old days. That doesn't apply today. Well, I beg to differ. And if the hobby were to, if things were clear, if we evolved into something good or something better, then I wouldn't have such a heartburn with it. But when I came back into the hobby in 2024, there was no hobby consensus. It was chaotic. And this is how come I think it's so important to understand the importance of the first. And there's a lot of, it seems like there's a lot of ways this thing can go, but breaking it down simply as you did, it should be fully licensed, right? At least that's how we view it. All right, let's be politically sensitive here. The way you and I view it is that it should be fully licensed, that it should be in the player's first year in the league, and all of those attributes. And that lines up with historical context. And that, I believe, is the right path for us anyways. Let everybody else create their own path, I guess, Chris. And I spent a lot of years pushing back on but that wasn't the right way to go. The way I'm doing it now seems to be a lot more accepting of folks, and they're starting to understand the historical aspect of it all and psychological side of things as well, right? Brother Chris, you're my man. I I'm gonna be landing the plane here. Before I do, I wanted to personally thank you for the support you've given me over the years, and it wasn't all that long ago where I found myself kind of in a pit because of all of the backlash that I was getting. And then I started to hear this one guy named Chris McGill going to different podcasts and saying, "Hey, I think we need to listen to this guy." And forever grateful for that. You literally lifted my spirits. You literally pulled me out of the pit, and you gave me the confidence to proceed. Proceed with caution, but proceed. So I thank you for that. And any last questions or comments you got before we go?
Grateful to be on the show. Grateful that you make content. Grateful to have learned from you, and to be able to have this discussion with you. And in anticipation of people hearing this and having their own thoughts, I very much look forward to them. And this is an ongoing dialogue, I would say, that in the Wittgensteinian sense, that we're not solving a debate here, we're dissolving confusion instead, and trying to continue to get on the same page.
I love that. Dissolving confusion. All right, brother Chris, thank you once again. Chris Hoge on YouTube, right? And then where is the Friday night thing with the crew?
That's on YouTube as well. So the crossover show is on the Card Ladder YouTube account, and generally speaking, we do a late night Friday show. It's now live on YouTube, and then the recording's instantly available.
Yeah, and you've have so many appearances on so many different shows. I don't know.
People are sick of me.
I don't know if that's your job making you do that or just you doing it personally, but
oh man, anytime anybody wants to give me even the smallest microphone, I'll take it.
I hear you, man. Well, Chris, thank you for your time. Appreciate you, and we'll do it again in the future, man.
Sounds good.
Hey, friends, thanks for sticking around. As I promised, I wanted to give a little bit of commentary on this entire series with Chris. I'm a big note taker. I always have been. And it's one of them things that was embedded in me when I went to school. I kind of shared in here that I studied theology. And one of the things that was ingrained in me in the very first day was word studies and note taking. And it was one of them things where I had to hear either sermons or I had to hear professors speak, and they would want to see actual notes of what we heard, and they wanted us to kind of create this outline to kind of reflect and meditate on what was taught, and that and word studies. Words matter, folks. Words are a really big deal, and it's one of them things where it kind of I did it for so long, and I grew so much because of my note taking. It kind of stuck with me. And even when I went, and that's another thing that really helped me progress in my career, was when I would sit in on meetings, I would be the one guy, most of the time, the only guy taking detailed notes on what was being taught. And it's just something I really enjoy doing. And there's certain times, I don't do it as much anymore, but there are times where I am triggered, like when I hear Chris McGill talk on many topics. He's a deep thinker, man, and he comes out with some really good debatable topics, right? But this was one where I really carved out some notes. And I kind of wanted to share with you, in the event that perhaps we went a little too deep into the philosophy and psychology side of things. I wanted to kind of break it down in a simpler format so that I can understand it, because when deep goes deep, I have to sit down and think about what's going on. And so that's the exercise I use. Is I rewatched it and I took some detailed notes. I just want to like recap this thing because it's a powerful teaching. The first thing that we talked about in this 3-part series that I had with Chris was that language matters, right? Everything, today is lumped under the term rookie. Under that term, that word, everything and everything is included in there, no matter what it is. If we think it's a rookie, it's lumped into that word under that same umbrella. But since we don't know or we refuse to learn, instability is inevitable. Some of us are actually innocent bystanders because we are just ignorant. And it's not a derogatory term. It's just simply you just don't know because you weren't around back in the day, because nobody has taken the time to teach you or explain it to you, and so you really truly are ignorant of the topic, or you're just refuse to accept or refuse to learn about historical facts, and you're just caught up in your own little world. And either way, chaos is inevitable, because that's what we have the majority of today. Either the majority are ignorant because they've never known or never been taught, or the other half is they just don't care. They don't care what anybody says. They're going to do things their way. And there's this element, when you mix the two together, what you have is chaos. And that's exactly what we have. So language matters. And when we have this chaos ensues. And unfortunately, so do scams. So does frustration. So does debate. And this is how come we fall into these things, because there's no rule of thumb. There's nothing that has been established that is concrete. Well, not until now. And in my book, I also detailed, there's a part of in the chapter where when I start determining, how do we fix this? How do we get out of this? How do we stop this? And it's simply through language. It's everybody finding a common language. We're all speaking the same way, or we call it what it truly is instead of what we want to call it. And so that is kind of the first part of the doctrine that Chris and I covered, and that was the language. That language truly does matter in the hobby. And a lot of the problems that we have, a lot of the bickering that we have, is because we're not understanding what each other means. And as I continue to look through my notes here, we also we addressed the issue of, or not an issue, but the topic of love of the first. Not only does language matter, but there is also a love of the first that every collector really has. And we see that first matters in type 1 photographs. It matters in comic books. You have first edition of books that are very, very popular. People are gravitated towards the first of those items, those hobbies. And then in the sports card hobby, we got the first appearance on a card, right? That's the very first time this player appeared on a card. First appearance on a team. Some people don't like the rookie card because it's a team that they don't like, but then that player got traded to their favorite team, and then they have a thing for the first card of that player on that specific team. And for example, Luka's first year cards in a Laker uniform, or LeBron James' first year card in a Laker uniform. But even though those are little niches, little nuances within the hobby that we kind of like, we do see that it's very short-lived. Those cards kind of spike when they first come out, but long-term, they quickly fizzle out. And there's the first year of a certain product line. That's also very popular. I remember 1997 Bowman Chrome, when back in the day when it first came out. I bought cases of that stuff, and I still have most of them. I have a complete set of it anyways. But that was a very important set to me anyways, 97 Bowman Chrome. But a more modern day example is 2012 Panini Prism. That is a very popular product. It's the first year that Panini Prism came out, and the cards are absolutely stunning. And so there's a demand, there's a desire for that first year product release. And that's totally cool and nothing wrong with that. But then we get into the weeds a little bit more, and we ask the question, well, why do we love the first? Okay, we understand the language barriers. We understand that language matters. We understand that within all hobbies, there is a love for the first of something. But why? And Chris seemed to think that it's something that's actually very logical, that it's very more like a mathematical reasoning that he gave, and that math helps us distinguish between the first and second. In other words, there's sequences. Sequence is important to the human psyche. The second doesn't mean much without the first, and the third doesn't mean much without the second and the first. So the importance of sequencing is crucially important. And he gave a great example with, like, our son or daughter doesn't exist without us, because we had to precede our children. We came first, and then our son or daughter came second. This logical mathematical reason also is very important in sports. We play all of these games for what? So that at the end of the season, we can get in first. We want to go be first because we can get into the playoffs. We want to be first in the playoffs because then we get to go to the semifinals. We want to be first in the semifinals so that we can go to the finals. We want to win in the finals for what reason? So we can become first, so that we can become the champions. No different in track and field. You have tremendous athletes running this relay race or whatever kind of race it is. Why? Because the goal is to become first. The goal is to win. In other words, there is something within our human psyche that pursues or wants to compete to be first. So first really, really matters in the grand scheme of the equation. There's something very special that when we look at a player's full run, say they played 20 years, and we look at the scope of all of the cards that were produced, there's something very unique, something very special about the first cards that came out of that player. And so in that essence, when you look at the player's 20-year career, there is rarity in that 1 year that he was actually a rookie. But then hold on a second. Having a total understanding of all of that, we have to understand that there are parameters. We have to understand that parameters matter too. So we take all of these rookie card guidelines and best practices and such, right? But we have to also understand and carve out some things. And we seem to think and come to a consensus between him and I anyways, that it's crucially important to define what is a sports card. And I think that is the first thing that we have to determine for ourselves. Now, there is a hobby consensus out there, but there are some who do not want to follow the hobby consensus for whatever reason. I have my theory, but I'm going to leave it to myself for today. And this is important to define because it comes down to this, and that is, when does it end? If there are no rules, if there are no guidelines, if there are no boundaries in place, then when does it end? You say the first card, and okay, so the 84 star is Jordan's first card. Can I tell you, no, it isn't. There was a schedule that was released in 83, 84 that has him, a picture of him on it. And then if that's the case, well, then what about his high school ID? Would that not be the true rookie card? And so on and so forth. And we exaggerated that point by taking it all the way back to the birth certificate. When does it end? This is how come we need boundaries and structures and definitions as to exactly what is a sports card. And through that, then we can determine which is his true rookie card. And this is how come part of the doctrine of the first is understanding the parameters do matter. And it's one of those things where we have to have a healthy understanding of what actually is a sports card, and then we can create boundaries. And once we have an understanding, an overall knowledge of what a rookie card is, then we can carve out and create our own little nuance that we like, but still understanding and respecting that there is a structure of parameters that do exist and they do matter. And lastly, a big part of the doctrine of the first, another portion of it is that socialization matters. And I didn't really know exactly what socialization means, but here it goes. Here's what it means. A continuing process whereby an individual acquires a personal identity and learns the norms, values, and behavior and social skills appropriate to their social position. This is really, really good. So if our social position is that of a collector, then I have a responsibility to learn the values, behavior, and social skills of being a collector. And so that is the portion that may be debatable to many, because nobody wants to fall under social norms. Everybody wants to be creative and have that liberty to create whatever they want, whenever they want. But through this delicate exercise, and here's why it's so important, you guys, consensus is birthed. This is how come we have to understand that all societies have a hierarchy, a structure of coexisting. And it's really, really important. Have you ever gone to work and you notice a new guy that, you know, you've been there for many years, you have a lot of tenure, you know that your job very well, you know the history of the job for at least since you've been there. And let's just say you have a new guy that comes in and he's been there 3 months, and all of a sudden he knows it all. He starts spewing out criticisms on how you're doing your job and how the company is running the department or the company, and he starts spewing out ideas out of his mouth that his way of doing it is better and he's going to change it. And you would look at this kid like he was nuts, right? And that's because, see, he doesn't understand the socialization aspect behind the job. And I would love to. Here's another example. Go to prison, go to any prison, and you're going to quickly understand the hierarchy of society within that culture. And the way I've seen, at least in documentaries and from what I've heard, is that if you're the new guy that just got arrested, your butt better be up at 4 o'clock in the morning when the guard brings in the mop and the broom, because the responsibility of sweeping and mopping for that day falls on the new guys that came in prior. Now, go to prison and say that you don't agree with that. Go to prison and say, hey, this whole hierarchy thing, this whole structure that we have set up here, these rules that are in place, I don't agree with them, and that's going to change. I'm going to do it my way. You can obviously, logically, you can see the potential problem in that. But I think it's no different in the sports card hobby. There's been social norms that have been accepted in decades past, but somehow, some way, we lost that. We express those things as not important, and now things are chaotic. And this is how come I voiced my opinion, and many others who are in agreement with me will voice, and we will debate, and we will defend historical facts. And that's how come this stuff is important. in closing, as I was listening to Chris very closely this past week, again, on this, as I was editing this video, he made mention that his overall point was balance, that we have hobby consensus on one end, and then we have independent approach and independent expression, right? So there's this seesaw concept going on, right? And I can agree with that, and that makes sense. Um, However, to me, it can become, that can be a little dangerous too. And um, I'm okay with balance, but we also have to have um, respect for the doctrine, right? We see this a lot in the history. If we study the history of religion, what we see is that there was a doctrine being taught, and there were some people who didn't agree. So what happened is, that's how come certain denominations exist, or so many different denominations exist, because um, a lot of people don't agree. And so what they do is they break away and create something new. And so there's a danger in that, to me, that I think eventually the all these splits and all these genres of religion, everything gets watered down, because the truth, the gospel, has been split up in so many different forms that eventually it loses its luster, it loses its value, and things become watered down, muddied per se. This was, if anything else, just a really good mental exercise, just to kind of sharpen our academia on things, and how to really bring the sports card hobby into other layers of our lives, to kind of intertwine them. I understand, the hobby is more of a relaxing thing, but this is also part of the equation. Learning, debating, reflecting, meditating, that could all be part of the fun too. And it may not be for everybody, but it is for some of us. And some of us like to think things through, and kind of have a broader understanding of the hobby, and how it relates to our life. And if anything else, it's good food for thought. With that said, friends, I thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, not all rookie cards are created equal. Until next time, buenos nachos, muchachos.